Okay, so we're up to Siman Nun Dalet, Halacha Gimel. HaMesaper bein Yishtabach leYotzer, someone who talks between Yishtabach and Yotzer, Averi biyodai, it's considered Averi v'chayzer leha ma'erchei ha'milchama. Someone who talks between Yishtabach and Yotzer, it's an Averi and he has to go back. He's one of the categories of people who goes back before the battle begins. If it's a communal matter, a lifsek stock or a stocker matter, then it'll be okay to be mafsik. Says Mishnah Berurah, Gimel Sivkot and Dalet HaMesaper, B'ksov and Kosov Leima, B'aser Simei Tshuva. Listen to this. That in the Aser Simei Tshuva, Mizmer, we say the Mizmer Mimamakim Krosichu Hashem. We put in that Mizmer in before between Yishtabach and Barechu. It's difficult to understand how we do this because we're inserting something at a place where Chazal are very strict about. So it says the Mishnah Berurah, what does that mean? The person who's scared should go home from battle. Chazal say that he's scared of the averis he may have done. There are certain barriers, clippers, which prevent the tefillah ascending on high. And by saying Pesukei Zimra, that cat cuts off these barriers, and therefore all our tefillahs will ascend. But when a person talks, all the barriers come back because of this avera. These gidudim, these barriers, these hurdles. Therefore, you got to be very careful not to speak between Yishtabach and Yotzer. Lifsek tzedakah, to discuss monetary matters to do with tzedakah, v'hu adin l'chol dvar mitzvah, and indeed any other dvar mitzvah. V'davka ben Yishtabach leYotzer shu inyan acher. That's to do specifically if it's between Yishtabach and Yotzer with regard to another matter. I've been Kaddish or Barechu, so but that's the end of Yishtabach. But to speak between Kaddish and Barechu, when the Shliach Tzibur finishes Yishtabach, says Kaddish, and then goes straight into Barechu, to speak between Kaddish and Barechu, or between the Prakim of Kriya Shema, or Birchaseh, or indeed Pesukei Zimra, also lahafsik, one shouldn't be mafsik. Okay, let's go back to the Ramah. And therefore there seems to be a minhag, I've never seen this, that in many places to make a mishaberich for a choyle, a likbol bebeis hakneses sheyasel din ben Yishtabach leYotzer v'chol ze mikri tzorech mitzvah. To do it at that point is called a tzorech mitzvah, and therefore it's okay. Then, since there's been a bit of a break and he's going straight into Barechu or to Kaddish, he should say a few psukim of Pesukei Zimra, just a few psukim. Then v'yom Kaddish aleim. Then he can say Kaddish ki la'olam ein omrim Kaddish below Tehillah lefonov. You can't just say a Kaddish standalone. You need to have something on the back of it. We'll see in a minute. That's why we say the Rabbi Chanani ben Akashya, right? V'lochein maschil and arvis below Kaddish. And therefore we can begin Arvis below Kaddish. That because there's no Mizmer before. We just go straight into Barechu without saying Kaddish before the Barechu because there was no Mizmorim that we said prior to that. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkot and Zayin, Hashliach Tzibur Mashmet Afilim Lo Omerak Hu Levat HaPsukim Yochel Mekadosh. Even in the Shliach Tzibur alone says these Psukim, that's sufficient. Mixas Pesukei Zimra Vim Lo Omer Psukim Lo Mekadosh. And if you didn't say the Psukim, you can't say Kaddish. Rak Yaschel Barechu below Kaddish. You just go straight into Barechu without saying Kaddish if there was that sort of break. You cannot have a Kaddish without some psukim in front of it. Unless the Shliach Tzibur said it, he went over a bit of it, or belachash if you said it quietly, ba'arvis. That's why you say the Shamalas before in some nuschos in Mariv, then you can say the Kaddish. Shah Kaddish koya la tefillah. V'kosav Magen Avram shelochein noagu lema prisa shema Barechu nikras prisa shema. That's therefore we say prisa shema, which is Barechu, because it comes b'siman samach tes achar gma tefillah shmona esra belachash. After the silent shmona esra, kadei sheyema kaddish al tefillah shmona esra, so that we can say Kaddish on the Shemona Esrei. Aval achakach, but later lo shaykh lema Kaddish. But to say another Kaddish later without any mizmar beforehand, you can't do that. Unless im lo yoma tzechila mixas psukim. Va'ata chadoshim mikarav ba'u. And now a new thing has appeared, says the Mishnah Berurah. Sheperson Shema, you say Barechu, acha Kaddish, basrav, v'imrim shenis Kaddish. And then they say Nocha Kaddish, another Kaddish. V'einu Nochen, it's not correct. The ma'inyin lo mashnei Kaddishim smuchim zelazeh. Why all of a sudden you're saying two Kaddishim after Mariv? If you say a few psukim beforehand, that could be different. Below tehillah, you need to say some sort of mizmar beforehand, or after the tefillah, or kamesha kasavnu be'esif katan hakodim. V'chein acha shalom de'in eze inyan mitayra shabal peh yuchalem b'kadosh rabbanon. And so too, you person says a mishnah, a person says a dvar Torah, so then you can say a kadosh rabbanon. V'ayim b'morgan avram shemasik the dafka im oma achazeh al kopon mixes divrei agoda. It should be a divrei agoda. Because the Kaddish Rabbanon is specifically going on Dvar Agoda. Because that's called Divrei Agoda, and therefore that justifies the Kaddish Rabbanon afterwards. When a person, there's a learning of Mishnayos, so that afterwards you can say Kaddish Rabbanon. However, if it's after Psukim, you say Kaddish Shalom. Afilu rak acha shlosh psukim, even in 3 psukim. Ve'ein lo mekadesh elim kein hayu asar noshim beis hakneses b'shas amiras psukim v'alimud. You need at least 10 people there at the time. K'mosh yisbar b'siman nun hey b'mishnah Berurah sif cotton base. Ve'afilu im rak shnayim shlosh lomdim, even if there are only 2 or 3 people learning, but there are avorim Kaddish k'sheish masar. But if there are 10 people there at the time of Kaddish, then that's okay, even if they're only a small group learning. Ve'afilu mishalei lomad yochel gam kein lema Kaddish k'mei priest shema l'kamen. Even if someone wasn't there part of the learning, he's able to say Shema. And we said that's why Arvis with Mariv you go straight into Barechu. You don't say a Kaddish before Mariv. Arvis below Kaddish says the Mishnah Berurah ayin lekam b'siman samates mashak sav nesham. Okay, carrying on the Ramah, we'll just finish off this simon. V'chein mishelo hoylo sitzes o tefillin. Interesting case. Shachris. You didn't have your tefillin. You left tefillin at home, and someone brought them for you. Or even the shliach tzibur. Ve'hivilo ben Yishtabach lekaddish, and they arrive after Yishtabach before the Kaddish. Yochel anichem levorech alem. You're allowed to put on your talis or tefillin between Yishtabach and Barechu and the Kaddish. Avo bein Kaddish to Barechu, but between Kaddish and Barechu, lo yafsik b'shum davar. V'chol shkein shelo yafsik lachar she'amad shliach tzibur Barechu. Once the shliach tzibur started Barechu, then you certainly shouldn't. Kodim shemaschinim berachas yotzeh, because that's already considered be'emtza perek. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Besif Katan Yud Aleph, v'chein mishelai. The chol zeh tzorech mitzvah. This is all considered the tzorech mitzvah. Putting on tefillin, talis, whatever, that's called the tzorech mitzvah. And after Yishtabach, before the Kaddish, that's allowed. Al kein mutar lahafsik lachar shegam berachas Yishtabach. Yud beis vehiviuloi. Bein liyochid, bein l'shliach tzibur. Whether it's an individual, whether it's the actual chazan himself. Even though it's a gnai for the tzibur to wait for the shliach tzibur to put on talis or tefillin, because the shliach tzibur has got no other choice. When else is he going to put it on? In this situation, we don't require the shliach tzibur to go back and say a few psukim before he says the Kaddish after Yishtabach, because it's a very small gap. He said the whole psukim zimra, and now he's just putting on his talis or just putting on his tefillin. We don't have to wait anymore. V'nira the biyochid mari ba'ofen sheyeh yochel ligmar hanochas talis tefillin koizim shegei hashas la'omein yesh meirabo. The individual should be putting on his tefillin, talis tefillin after Yishtabach, before Kaddish, so long as he's got time to do all of that before he gets to omein yesh meirabo. Because you can't be mafsik between Shelyad and Shel even to say what happens if you are in between that stage? You're putting on a tefillin Shelyad and you're about to put on tefillin Shel and the guy says Barechu. And you don't say Amen Yesh Meiraba. Shoisik v'shamei mechaven lezeh ma she'emrim. You're silent and you have in mind what they're saying. V'zeh inoch l'asas kein lechatchila. You shouldn't ideally try and get yourself in that situation. Lot says b'zeh afilu l'mayid dekamel on shemei ka'ineh. Kudmuch brachas chafalaf on base. But tois demaschal ad ubereshon. Of oifen zeh tov yoyse better sheyamtin milan yachatfin. And better if you know that you're not going to make it to Amen Yesh Mirabba. Better to hear the Kaddish, wait, then put on tefillin at Shisam Hashatz Barechu after the Shatz has said Barechu. Va'ozonichim, do it after Barechu. Or in brachas, with regards to brachas, we'll see in the next sif. Bein Kaddish Yud Gimel. Bein Kaddish Rotzelem Mishah Shehischel Kaddish Da Kaddish the Barechu Gam Ken Shaykh, because the Kaddish is also Shaykh to the Barechu. Va'ayim b'machronim shekosfu. The Bein Kaddish the Barechu din lechol mili lebein haprokim. Between Kaddish and Barechu has got the same din as bein haprokim. The tekef achach Barechu immediately after Barechu after Hischel Adayim Berachas Yotzeh Havakem Zabra. Even though you haven't yet started Yotzeh, but you've heard Barechu, that's got a din of bein haprokim. The Mishon ve'elechu kasolas Yotzeh, as if you've begun Yotzeh. Ki ikka kavonas hashatz ma'ashem Barechu Hashem, we're blessing Hashem with the bracha of Yotzeh, as if you've started. Therefore, if you didn't get a talis or tefillin, you can put it on straight away. But the bracha, once baruch was said, don't make the bracha yet. Put your talis, put your tefillin on, but don't make the bracha. And then and then you just agitate the tefillin or the talis, and then you make the bracha. Or tefillin, and what about tefillin? If you get the tefillin before baruchu, put them on and make the bracha. But once baruchu has begun, and then you want to put on your tefillin, put them on. You put them on without a bracha. And then, amazingly, when do you make the bracha on the tefillin? You've put them on after baruchu without a bracha. You then finish off the bracha of Yotzeh, and then before you start Ava Rabbah, then you make the bracha on the tefillin. You agitate them. You mashmesh v'yivarech aleim kavayim b'samach. Okay, last sif cotton. Yudalad la'achar she'omar miloshin zeh muchad afilu yochid le'yafsik. Even an individual shouldn't be mafsik v'ayim b'sif cotton hakodim, like we said above. V'nir dekol zeh davka b'v'njimar b'fnim. V'hainu shekvar goma brechas Yishtabach v'oimed lahaskel brechas Yotzeh. You finish Yishtabach and you're about to say Yotzeh. Avin mu'oisek adayim b'psukei zimra. If you're behind and you're still in the middle of Ashrei, you're still saying psukei zimra. V'choshkin bo atzal ispala. And certainly now, if you come to, but you just rocked up to shul. You're not going to just suddenly launch into Yotzeh. You're going to say Pesukah de Zimra. V'shama Kaddish Barechu ein adin b'zeh kem zeh. That has not got the din of Emsa Perek. You're still in the middle of Ashrei. You put on your talis tefillin, and then you make the brachas, and you say finish off the Pesukah de Zimra, and then you carry on. Okay, we'll leave it there.